He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content and support us at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Cryptid Clues. You guessed it, yes, spooky season is upon us, Halloween has arrived, and with it, many a ghoul and ghost. To celebrate this haunted occasion, I wanted to follow up on a topic that popped into my head back on the Exorcism introductory episode. Haunted and or cursed movie sets. This topic actually came to me ages ago when I was reading about the film set for the Amityville Horror and how it was actually subject to just a peculiar couple of things, but we'll get into that shortly. A little bit of housekeeping. As I said earlier, you can tune into our episode that takes an introductory look at exorcisms, a little bit of the history involved, and also a surprise extra YouTube drop from Reuben and I. We were playing a video game called Bigfoot on Steam. It's a funny and good time, so tune into that. It's been something that we've dabbled in quite a few times before, but great game. But let's get into our topic. Now, what can a ghost haunt in particular? At this point, the term ghost can be a variety of things, and hauntings may consist of particular locations, objects, or even people themselves. And so when I say the term can be a variety of things, it could be a ghost, it could be a poltergeist. Along those lines, there's different categories depending on what is being haunted and the level of the haunting going on. Now, forewarned, there are some sad notes in some of these cases with unexpected deaths from film crew members, but it is also those deaths that yield some of these haunting case files on these movie sets. Our first case is the 1976 supernatural horror film, The Omen. In short, this film plot is about a boy who turns out being the Antichrist, hence all the death and misfortune that surrounds him in the movie. Now, as for being cursed, in an electrifying way, lightning played a huge part in this. To get struck by lightning on one occasion is certainly rare, but if you have multiple individuals subject to multiple lightning strikes, then you begin to take notice of this reoccurring abnormality. So in September of 1975, actor Gregory Peck, who played Robert Thorne in the film, was flying out to London, and during the flight, lightning had struck the plane. Within weeks, yes, weeks, the executive producer, Mace Neufeld, was flying to Los Angeles. Sure enough, also had a lightning strike their plane. Okay, uncommon, but not impossible. But it did not stop. The film's writer, David Seltzer, was flying and his plane got struck by lightning. And lastly, the producer, Harvey Bernhard, was out filming in Rome when lightning struck down and was, and I can't stress this enough, superbly close to hitting the man himself. Now, he was not on a plane, but this did involve lightning. So you have 4 lightning instances. And it doesn't end there. Regarding planes, at least, Gregory Peck, as we mentioned before, was due on set for an action sequence, but the scene itself was delayed. So the jet that they had chartered and he was going to board was no longer needed to bring Peck in for the film. The next day, the plane itself that was canceled for Peck met an unfortunate fate as it had hit a flock of birds, causing it to crash. There were no survivors on board, both passengers and crew. Now, I tried to look more into this, but it was a bit convoluted to find reliable information on it. The plane, though, is reported to have crashed into a station wagon that had a family in there. This full family was the family of the plane's pilot. Very, very peculiar circumstance, but it's just so much negative notes all tied in here together. And while the crew was in England filming, it doesn't stop there. While they were filming in England, a sequence in an animal park, one of the animal handlers was unfortunately killed. The scene is set up where vicious animals are attacking the film characters, and one involving baboons and one is involving dogs. The baboon handler had passed the next day because of the animals, and the pack of dogs that they had on set were just becoming uncharacteristically violent. They were ignoring their handler, and they caused actual serious injury to the stuntman. Now, I do believe that animals have certain other awarenesses that we do not express and we cannot necessarily tap into right now, especially dogs and cats operating and being able to tune into a higher frequency. That's why when my cats are staring into a corner of our home, I get kind of tense, and I'll look into that corner and think, oh, what are you looking at? And I'm glad that it pays to have pets because they can detect those things. And when they're in your home, I feel like it provides a degree of safety and a degree of alert, because not all the time can a Ring doorbell catch something. Sometimes you need a cat or a dog to sense something and to let you know that they're barking or they're very timid, depending on a certain part of the home. Just be a little bit more observant about that. I digress. Anyways, you have the situation where if there is something on set that is very negative, these animals can sense that and they're responding to that, uncharacteristically so. The film did have some other things that occurred, some very much spot on the nose. So again, it's tricky to kind of weave through that information, but this did not stop them from making more Omen films, as money ultimately has the final say over such things. I believe there were 2 more, Omen 2 and an Omen 3, and a remake that came out, and there probably is some other miniseries and such that is derived from it in total. But that is basically the bulk that has occurred with that film. So there is death and there is harm, and it's very terrifying. And of course, films can be very dangerous, but you usually hear it as maybe poor practice, stunts going wrong, stuff like that. Lightning hitting that many times on people that have had prominent effects and connections to this film, just very interesting. And it is very in line too with the theme of the film, where you have the Antichrist and it's just death and destruction surrounding him. You have this film and it just seems like it's death and destruction surrounding it. Now, our next film is a more recent one, but exceptionally popular, The Conjuring. And if you are unfamiliar, the Conjuring films are based on the case files of the Warrens, Ed and Lorraine. Now, they were American paranormal investigators associated with some very prominent hauntings. Ed himself being a self-taught demonologist, and Lorraine, a clairvoyant. The two formed a powerful team together, and they actually had founded the New England Society for Psychic Research back in 1952. Their total case count surpassed well over 10,000 during their career. It was very interesting reading more into them, and I'm going to have to do a very in-depth episode on them because there's so much information to talk about. And I believe I spoke to them a little bit when I was doing an episode last year on haunted dolls, because Annabelle is obviously a very, very prominent one that is related to the Conjuring films. But in a real life sense, the Warrens in one of their cases, I digress, however. Some of the things that the Warrens would do, they would go in and they would investigate and they would try and deduce if this is just your home creaking or if there is something really here. And in many cases, there would be something there. Before doing the first Conjuring film, however, the writers, directors, and producers, they all met extensively with the real-life Lorraine Warren. This is until she passed in 2019. Ed Warren had sadly passed away back in 2006. The key thing to note here, though, is that it was insisted to the film's producer that the first film be made specifically about Ed and Lorraine's investigation into the Perrin case, which is exactly what the first film focuses on. Now, this case had a very pronounced effect on the Warrens, and in turn also did for the cast and crew of the film. The actress who portrayed Lorraine Warren, Vera Farmiga, mysteriously kept waking up at that witching hour of 3 a.m. This was on the dot. In addition to this, the actress Vera had mysterious claw marks that kept appearing wherever she went. For example, while working on her laptop, and this is the first instance, she had closed it briefly just to kind of go on a phone call and talk to someone, only to reopen it later and see these digital claw marks across her screen. Not actually, when I say digital, they were just like on like her display. They weren't actual marks scratched across the screen. You can see photos of this online as well, her showing it off. Periodically, they would appear as filming went on, and from what I could tell, this is the last instance, and thankfully it was the last instance, because this time during production, she found claw marks on her thigh. They were a little bit different than what she had seen before, but they were prominently on her thigh. This wasn't the only form of physical danger, though, that I was able to find. Another one of the actresses who plays one of the parent daughters kept waking up covered in strange bruises during the filming. This actress was not involved in any stunts. The production was very strict about keeping the children safe and away from any dangerous stunts due to physical dangers. It's worth noting these bruises and this whole issue of bruising had not occurred before production and stopped after filming concluded. It is also interesting to note that the mom in the film was subject to bruising as a form of just kind of weakening her state down in the film's narrative. So it's just the two similarities between them is very, very, very interesting. There are other occurrences of things moving around on their own and peculiar noises being heard. Those such things also continue to occur into production of the sequel, Conjuring 2. With such a powerful advisor, though, an individual in the paranormal community as a film consultant, I don't at all doubt that some paranormal connections to those films would start to arise. They are scary and powerful in their own way, and maybe it's due to some pre-existing fear that we all have of something supernatural kind of appearing up. And when I say that, things moving on their own, people are thinking, oh, is something really moving? Or I'm working on this scary film and, you know, maybe I'm just manifesting it to actually move on its own. And maybe it is just damn good cinema. It's hard to say. But these things are powerful. They are scary, like I said. And when you have someone that is very deeply rooted in the paranormal community being used as kind of a relay for this information, becomes very, very, very engaging. There were reports, too, when they would be talking to Lorraine and she would be addressing questions and trying to give answers. And there would be times when she would have to take pause and she would ask the question again. And she said that she felt like it was being blocked. Something did not want her to relay this information out and repeat it. There was a lot of things that for the film were never seen the light of day before, recordings, and they dusted them off, brought them out for the film, and were able to go in and do a lot of research. So this film had a lot of passion behind it because, again, that pronoun effect that it had on the Warrens, and it was being able to interpret it into this live action setting. Members of the parent family that came onto set later on actually felt shocked at how spot on the set looked, and it was kind of like stepping back through a time portal for some of them. And even one of the daughters, now granted all the family members had different experiences, but one of the daughters had seen the casting of the witch and just felt terrified because for her this was seeing exactly what she saw as a child, and for good reason. That would immediately cause fear and cause a sense of slight PTSD, a little bit of trauma there. But I digress, though, however. Moving on to our next film. This is one I alluded to earlier. This is the Amityville Horror. I'll detail a bit about the original case that had occurred and then the occurrences when the filming took place. On November 13th, 1974, 30 miles outside of New York City in Amityville, a man named Ronald DeFeo Jr. murdered his family with a firearm while they slept. All of his family in the house. Ron had passed away in 2021 at a New York correctional facility, and upon changing his story multiple times, he did claim that he had heard voices urging him to kill his family. 13 months after this event had taken place, the Lutz family had purchased the home at a very reduced cost and moved in. This lasted 28 days before they packed up and left the premise. The murders conducted by Ron took place at around 3 a.m., and members of the Lutz family were reportedly waking up consistently around this time. The family claimed to smell horrible odors in parts of the home and extreme cold spots in other certain areas. They had a priest come in and do blessings before they had moved in, but there were still some very uncomfortable notions that came from that, from what I had found. Doors had opened and closed on their own, sometimes just slamming shut. Furniture was shifting around, and George Lutz's wife, Kathy Lutz, had reported levitating from her bed. Of course, these claims were met with skepticism, but family members took lie detector tests and had passed. They did face financial issues, and this only furthered skeptics to assume that maybe this haunting was a ruse to gain something to sell to the public. You have other people that knew them coming out and saying similar things, that, oh, the family was just kind of drinking and eating and just figuring out a way to kind of make an extra buck off of this. But of course, this house isn't devoid of having a very negative thing transpire here, as we discussed with the previous family. That sort of mark doesn't just go away. There's something that negative leaves an imprint, a powerful, energetic imprint, negatively so. I digress, however. With the film, certain things happen that warranted apprehension while filming. Not anything over the top, but just certain things that you make your hair stand up on the back of your neck. And not just with the original 1979 film, but the 2005 remake as well. Actor James Brolin, who starred in the original film, was apprehensive about accepting the role, but ultimately agreed. After getting to a certain part of the film's script as he was reading through it, he started to notice that his pants would begin falling from hangers for absolutely no apparent reason. Of course, falling pants isn't much to go on, but it's still something that I would hold my breath about. I know when I hang something and I come back and it's on the floor, I take pause and I think, oh, did I not hang this correctly? Could something have made this fall? Or was it just fluke accident? It's hard to say, but it's something that I ponder about quite a bit. The 2005 remake had a few extra things occur. This was actually starring Ryan Reynolds. Himself and other crew members kept reporting to wake up at around that 3 a.m. mark. Coincidentally, like we mentioned before, was the time of the murders conducted by Ron. This is also the witching hour, as we discussed back with The Conjuring. During the film's boathouse scene as well, local police actually arrived to inform the crew that a dead body of a fisherman was found floating nearby in the water. Now, that's not directly caused by this situation, the filming or anything like that, but the negative connotation is certainly emanating from this. It just has that that omen to it, that negative vibe. It's also worth noting that the Amityville Horror House was explored by the Warrens themselves, and I quote, "Evil, it's the personification of evil," end quote. And that is what Lorraine Warren had said back in 2005. They actually investigated the house back in 1976. Continuing again in relation to the Warrens, the 2018 film The Nun is another spin-off movie in the Conjuring universe, taking place in Romania in a monastery. The film was shot in a variety of historical areas in Romania, and despite the set being blessed multiple times by a Roman Catholic priest, the film's director still actually had some very personal haunting experiences occur during the film. It was basically apparitions that would just appear and disappear. In closing, we have a cult classic, though, Poltergeist. And I just want to say what this film did for its time with special effects and practical effects was absolutely insane. It was wild, but it was not devoid of its own strange occurrences. Released in 1982, the movie is about a family living in a planned neighborhood of California when strange paranormal things start to happen. Primarily focused on their youngest daughter, Carol Ann, these things quickly become sinister and the daughter becomes paranormally abducted, so to speak, as we learn that the community was built over an old cemetery. This film and its sequels are all claimed to be cursed. Mostly at this point due to Steven Spielberg, being the director, insisting on using real skeletons in the movie. Many sets that were built were subject to dangerous accidents while filming, and there was many deaths that happened between cast and crew members. This is really, really tragic, but the actress Dominique Dune, who played Dana Freeling in the first film, she was sadly strangled by her ex-boyfriend after the first film had released. Will Sampson from the sequel passed away due to a failed kidney transplant, and Julian Beck, who played Kane, passed away from stomach cancer. And sadly, you also have Heather O'Rourke, who played Carol Ann in these three films, and she had sadly passed away from septic shock, which is when your blood pressure drops to a very dangerous low level. So there is a lot of very negative things attached to this trilogy of films. My wife and I watched the first one recently, and just to know the backstory of events and know what pain has basically transpired through this has basically shed some interesting light onto it for me. And the fact alone that you would use real skeletons in a movie is beyond me. I get the authenticity that you're trying to achieve, but it just screams, come and do your worst hauntings. And just don't. Let the dead rest. I mean, for sure, to me, it seems like this franchise has been subject to the more prominent negative residual effects on the cast and crew compared to other things, following production and its release. But there are definitely some things you don't tamper with. And the movie's narrative, ironically, being something you don't tamper with, being the general plot, and just to achieve their film and how they did certain things, it just seems like ironic why they would, don't tamper with this, but they did, and they achieved the film, and the film was a success and all that stuff. But it's just very, very unfortunate, very sad that these cast and crew members met such ill fates on something like this. Could it be coincidence? All of these different things from these films could be coincidence. Absolutely. The lightning, these actors suffering health and physical loss. It's impossible to say what is what. But the idea that these negative things happen based on something that is a very negative film, it stirs the pot a little bit, and it makes people kind of I don't want to say fabricate, but it can exaggerate things a little bit, and you have to be careful. And that's where you have to weave through and find the little bits of information and kind of formulate your own opinion and think, oh, you know what, this does make sense. There's credit in here and there's evidence to support this. But yeah, I digress. As I always do, I ramble. As we close out, a few other notable haunted films throughout production are as follows: The Exorcism of Emily Rose, Rosemary's Baby, The Possession, The Innkeepers, and of course, Annabelle, which is, as we've already talked about, another one of the Warrens case files. Great horror movies. I love the Conjuring verse. But with that, our Halloween episode is concluded. You can find more episodes and content on our social media channels, X, formerly known as Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. You can also reach out to us directly with questions and such at CryptidClues@gmail.com. I hope you all have a wonderfully spooky Halloween. Take care and stay safe.